Welcome back, everybody, to the Real Psych Media. This is chapter number 2, Making Theories Out of Chaos. Last week we looked at chapter number 1, which was why people do what they do. We also did look deeper into different meta-theories as well as the biopsychosocial model. So chapter 2 is Making Theories Out of Chaos, and we see that it speaks about empirical method, which is an approach to truth that uses observation as well as experimentation. And we see that psychology as a whole is the scientific study of human behavior as well as mental processes. And it uses this idea of empirical method. So we see that in this chapter, there are different ways through scientific research as well as theories on how psychologists attempt to substantiate the truth of their claims and knowledge and establish their expertise in human behavior and mental processes. So this is where we see ideas of standard deviation come into play, and as well as the scientific method. So in this next section we see that it talks about applying the scientific method without using a Bunsen burner. So most of us were in high school and or some form of school that did teach us different scientific methods around using a Bunsen burner. So we're going to apply that in the psychology realm here in this section. So the 3 forms of knowledge that psychologists use are authority, rationalism, logic, as well as the scientific method. So authority uses in therapy sessions or settings, as well as education and training processes. Patients and students have to take someone's word for research, i.e. the researchers or doctors, so that's why we tend to go to a different higher authority in that specific realm when we have to get information about our health or anything to that extent based on research. The second form of knowledge from psychologists that they use is rationalism as well as logic. Okay, so these are used to create theories as well as hypotheses. So things must make logical sense to even begin to observe through this scientific lens. So you can't just come up with something illogical that is not even in a rational realm. So this is why it's one of the 3 forms of knowledge. And then lastly, the best and greatest, which is the scientific method. This is the preferred method of obtaining information and investigating behavior and mental processes. This is something that is used throughout various forms of scientific research as well as scientific literature. So also in this section we see that other things mentioned, like pretty much a good chunk of information that is out there is purely theoretical. But this makes perfect sense on logical and rational grounds. This is very, very good because we can find answers to things that we may see as impossible, but they're merely just using a theoretical lens. So we see that psychologists prefer to use the scientific method when seeking the truth because it is seen as fair and as an impartial process. So when the scientific method is in place, a theory that doesn't match the empirical results experienced in a research study is labeled as inaccurate. So this next section we see that we are going to be developing a good theory. So what exactly is a theory? So a theory is a set of related statements about a set of objects or events, the ones being studied specifically, that explain how these objects or events are related. So how these objects and events are related. So psychologists test theories by studying their logical implications. So theses are specific predictions based on these implications, these logical implications that the scientists use and psychologists use. So how do you have even a good theory? So that this chapter does break it down. In order for a good theory to take place, you need 3 parts. One is parsimony, precision, and testability. So parsimony, it must be super simple to explain, as simple as possible to explain in layman's terms as possible. But we still need to explain the available observation that is taking place. The second part of a good theory is precision. So we must be precise, not overly or largely or vague on specific statements, but the statements must be about reality. And then lastly, we see testability, which it must lend itself to scientific investigation, which means testability, they use that specific process, these theories, in order to test, in order to have scientific investigation take place for it to be actually valid. So now knowing about good theories, we are looking at a section that is called Researching for the Truth. So there's 2 broad categories to research when evaluating a theory. Descriptive research is number 1. It consists of observation and a collection of data without trying to manipulate any of the conditions or circumstances being observed. So what is descriptive research good for exactly? So it's good for developing new different theories or hypotheses. Usually is the first step for a researcher to investigate things that have yet to be studied. So these things, this descriptive research is not a cause and effect relationship. We will see with the next specific broad category of research that one is a cause and effect relationship, but just know that descriptive research is not a cause and effect relationship. So the second broad category that we see is experimental research. So this is the control and manipulation of specific objects and events being investigated in order to get a better idea of the cause and effect relationship between these objects or events. So this one is the cause and effect. Just keep in mind though that causation does not equal correlation. Okay, so this also in experimental research we see that there's a lot of mathematical usages, one specifically being z-factor, which is something affecting the hypothesis that the researcher may be unaware of actually, or not accounting for specifically in that specific given research. So it is an extraneous variable that we need to control in order to have confidence in our theory. So possible z-factors, variables specifically, could be culture, age, and even time of day. So in any scientific investigation, we see that we can never really prove a hypothesis true. Nothing can necessarily be specifically true. We can get super close to the truth, but there is a lot of different factors, such as the z-factor, that we didn't consider as a researcher or psychologist or scientist. So scientists set out to disprove the opposite of what their hypothesis actually is, so that they could get deeper into figuring out what it is not as opposed to what it is, which is very funny. So this was chapter 2, making theories out of chaos. We saw that getting scientific through different theories, how specifically coming up with our hypotheses, how to use those in specific given theories and or research, and as well as performing research and how psychologists use the scientific method. So the rest of the book does go over and break down various parts of theories and research. So we will be going over those later on. I do appreciate you guys staying till the end. I hope to see you next week. Come back again. If you have any specific topics you'd like me to discuss, talk about, books to break down, please let me know at therealpsychmedia@gmail.com. Thank you guys. See you next time.